Nobody threw the first punch. That detail matters. Because in the hours and days that followed, when the accounts were gathered and the statements were issued and the league began its own process of determining what had happened and why, the question of who started it would become the kind of thing that people argued about in the way they argue about things when the truth is complicated and the feelings are not. But everyone who was there agreed on one thing. They agreed on what started it. Not a play. Not a call. Not the compressed friction of a close game in a loud stadium between two teams with reasons to dislike each other. Words. Directed at Shohei Ohtani. In front of everyone. The Dodgers had come into that series carrying the particular confidence of a team that knows what it is. Not arrogance. Not the fragile bravado of a roster overestimating itself. The settled, grounded confidence of players who have been in the biggest moments and found something reliable inside themselves when it mattered most. The opposition understood this. Which is perhaps why what happened felt, to those who witnessed it, less like a spontaneous eruption and more like a decision that someone had made before the game even began. A calculated provocation. A choice to attack not the team's record or their lineup construction or any of the baseball arguments that are fair game in competition. A choice to attack Ohtani himself. Personally. Publicly. In the specific and ugly way that people attack someone when they have run out of legitimate means to diminish them and have decided that illegitimate ones will have to do. The words were heard by multiple players on both sides of the field. They were heard by umpires who would later describe them in formal documentation as language that went beyond competitive trash talk into territory the game does not permit. And they were heard by Roki Sasaki. Sasaki's reaction was not immediate. That detail also matters. He did not move toward the source of the words the moment they landed. He did not react with the explosive, reflexive anger that makes for clean narratives and obvious villains. He stood where he was. He looked at Ohtani first, the instinct of someone checking on a person before they check on themselves. Ohtani's expression had gone still. Not the composed stillness that Ohtani brings to difficult at-bats or high-leverage pitching situations, the professional stillness of a competitor locked into the task in front of him. This was different. This was the stillness of someone absorbing something that had landed in a place that competition does not reach. Something personal. Something aimed precisely enough to find the gap between the armor. Sasaki saw it. And something inside him that had been holding shifted completely. What followed happened quickly. Faster than the cameras fully caught. Faster than the umpires could position themselves to prevent. Sasaki moved toward the source of the words with the directness of a person who has made a decision and is no longer in the process of making it. He was not quiet about it. His voice carried across the field in a way that made it clear this was not a private confrontation. He wanted the words he was saying to be heard the same way the words directed at Ohtani had been heard. Publicly. Without softening. With the full weight of someone who had decided that silence in this moment was its own kind of failure. Then contact was made. And the benches emptied. What followed was the kind of scene that baseball produces rarely enough that when it happens, it marks a season permanently. Both dugouts. Both bullpens. The long sprint from the outfield corners that always looks slightly unreal, grown men in uniform running towards something rather than away from it, driven by the tribal loyalty of a shared jersey that overrides individual calculation in the specific heat of that kind of moment. The field became a mass of people in two colors. Not everyone was fighting. Most were separating. Most were the arms and bodies inserted between other arms and bodies, the voices saying stop and enough and let it go. But within that mass there were pockets of genuine confrontation, players from both sides who had found each other in the chaos and were no longer merely present but actively engaged. Umpires moved through it. Security moved through it. It took 4 minutes to fully restore order. 4 minutes is a long time when the thing being measured is a baseball field that has temporarily ceased to be a place where a game is being played and has become something rawer and louder and much harder to contain. When the separation was complete, when the field had been cleared enough that individual faces were visible again, the accounting began. 6 ejections. 3 from each side. Sasaki among them. The ejection of Sasaki carried a particular weight. He had been scheduled to start the following game. The Dodgers had built their rotation around that start, around the particular challenge that Sasaki presents to opposing lineups when he is right, which he had been, consistently, in the weeks leading up to this series. That start was now gone. And with it, in the immediate aftermath, went something harder to quantify than a pitching slot. The image of Sasaki being walked off that field, still visibly emotional, still carrying in his body the thing that had moved him to cross the distance between standing still and making contact, was the image that cameras captured most clearly in the chaos. It was not the image of an angry man. It was the image of a person who had watched something happen to someone he cared about and had responded with his whole self, consequences be damned. That distinction would matter in the conversations that followed. Ohtani did not speak to the media immediately after the game. The Dodgers requested time. The organization was composed enough in these situations to understand that the first words said after something like this would become the frame through which everything else was understood. They wanted those words to be right. When Ohtani sat down in front of the reporters, he had the look of a man who had spent several hours inside a feeling he was still not entirely finished with. A reporter asked him about what had been said. Ohtani was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough to become its own kind of statement. "I've heard things said on baseball fields before," he said finally. "This was different. This was meant to be different. Whoever said it knew what they were doing." Another reporter asked how he had felt in the moment. He considered that carefully. "I felt something I don't usually feel during a game," he said. "I don't want to name it exactly. But it was there." Someone asked about Sasaki. About whether Ohtani had spoken to him after everything had settled. Something moved across Ohtani's face. "Roki did what he did because of who he is," Ohtani said. "I didn't ask him to. I wouldn't have asked him to. But I understand it. And I won't pretend I don't understand it." He stopped for a moment. What he was protecting wasn't just me. It was something about this team. About what we believe is acceptable. He decided that what was said was not acceptable. And he acted on that. Another pause. "I'm not going to tell him he was wrong." Dave Roberts was the last to speak. He entered the room carrying the particular exhaustion of a manager who has spent a day managing not a baseball game but a human situation that baseball happened to contain. He sat down. He looked at the reporters without the usual careful composure that characterizes his public appearances. Something about this had gotten through the composure. A reporter asked him to describe what he had seen from his position in the dugout when everything began. Roberts nodded slowly. "I saw Roki hear something," he said. "And I saw what it did to him. Not because it was directed at him. Because of who it was directed at and what it meant." He folded his hands on the table. "I've managed a lot of baseball. I've seen a lot of things happen on a field. But watching Roki make that decision, watching him choose to respond the way he responded, I'm not going to stand here and give you the standard answer about how that can't happen and we don't condone it." He looked directly at the reporters. "I'm going to tell you that I understood it. And that understanding it made this the most difficult press conference I've sat at in a long time. Because my job requires me to say certain things. And the truth requires me to feel something different." The room was very quiet. What was said to Shohei today was the worst thing I've heard on a baseball field in my career. The absolute worst. And Roki Sasaki decided it was worth whatever it cost him to respond to it. Roberts shook his head slightly. "I can't tell you he was wrong. I've been trying to find the version of this where I can tell you that. I haven't found it yet." The league would issue its findings within 48 hours. Suspensions. Fines. The formal language of institutional consequence applied to something that institutional language was never fully designed to contain. Sasaki would serve his suspension. He would return to the mound. The rotation would adjust and the season would continue in the way seasons continue, absorbing damage, finding new shapes, moving forward because the schedule demands it. But the image remained. Roki Sasaki, crossing a field in front of thousands of people, towards something that had been said about someone he refused to watch be diminished without response. Not because he was asked to. Not because it was strategic or calculated or considered from every angle before he moved. Because he heard the words. He looked at Ohtani's face.